Sponsored by Stand Up to All Hate. Call a timeout against hate. I want to start with last night because that wasn't interesting. That was hard to watch. And I'm sitting there. It's December 26th. We have our first practice back after giving the guys a couple of days off. That's also hard to watch, right? Nothing falls out of shape quicker than college basketball players when you give them a couple of days off. But nonetheless, we get through it, turn on the game, and you're like, ooh, this is a hard watch. Bears fans chanting to sell the team. Seahawks aren't much better. They find a way to win 6-3. And Geno Smith looks a lot more like the Geno Smith that people wrote off, but he didn't write back, than the one that didn't write back, or whatever that it was cute and clever at the time, but man, he has regressed to the mean. And Caleb Williams looks kind of like a mess. Talented mess, but kind of like a mess. But I don't want to get into Caleb Williams, or the Bears, or who they should hire, and all that stuff. What I think is fascinating is that there's just a limit to how you can't expand the NFL for the same reason that you can't have this many games in standalone variety, right? The expansion of midweek football, which was a huge success for Netflix. Don't get me wrong, right? Netflix ends up killing it on Christmas Day, but because of where Christmas falls, now all of a sudden you're like, okay, we need another standalone game, and something's got to give. And there's just not that many good football games because there's not that many good football teams because there's not that many good football coaches because there's not that many good football organizations. And the more you show, the more it gets put on display. Right? Like, think of the Netflix games and, right now, obviously, you got Vikings-Packers this upcoming weekend. Gigantic game. How big is it? Again, I understand our games pale in comparison, but we moved our game, which is supposed to start at 4 o'clock, to 1 o'clock. And the opposing coach and AD at Purdue-Fort Wayne were like, why are you guys moving the game? I said, listen, in Green Bay, Wisconsin, when they take on the Vikings, who are in first place in the NFC North, we'd be lucky to get anyone to work at the Resch Center, let alone fans to come to the Resch Center. Like, this is that big a thing, that big a game, that big a weekend. But when you have that game and you have, again, it's the pecking order of who chooses the game. People do understand that, right? Like, the way it works is on a given week, whether it's Fox, CBS, ABC, ESPN, or NBC, they get the pick of the week, right? The Thursday night is usually further down the line there with Amazon. And in this particular case, Amazon was slotted, I'm sure, behind that of Netflix. Netflix paid, what was it, $120 million or something? It was something crazy for one day and a couple of games. But those picks were ahead. So then you're like, what's left? We'll give you Seattle and the Bears. Which, by the way, will probably rate really, really well. Why? Bears have a gigantic fan base, and Seattle does as well because not just, Dan Byer, but Seattle's been really, really, really good in many 20-somethings' lifetime. Right? Legion of Boom, or even go back to 30-somethings and when they made the Super Bowl previously. And if you track it, teams that go to a Super Bowl generally garner a big fan base. And then, of course, you have the old school, Bears, Lions, Packers, Cowboys, that all rate well. But gosh, that was hard to watch. And what happens is the more TV spots you have, the more of these games are put in standalone variety. And you don't watch them in red zone, and they get harder and harder and harder and harder to watch. Like, wow, this is the NFL? Sort of. There's just a limit. There's a limited. We talk about this all the time with quarterbacks. It doesn't matter how good the quarterback camps are or how good the quarterback training is. The fact is that there's, somewhere between 12 and 15 super competent starting quarterbacks in the NFL. Then there's somewhere in the 12 to 15 competent but second tier, sort of limited kind of backups. There's like 5 dynamic Super League guys. it's no different than we used to talk about this in the NBA, and it's still kind of present in the NBA, right? Like, why do you give a max contract to a guy who, just because he's the best player on your team, he's not one of the 5 best players in the league, right? We talk about in Major League Baseball and the NBA and the NFL, and is it the Hall of Fame or the Hall of Good? The Hall of Fame should be regarded for the best ever to play the sport. But these Hall of Fames get watered down more and more and more. And stat accumulators and guys that played in big markets or guys that had great postseason plays, oftentimes they get thrust into it, where it's like, how do you put Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, and Craig Biggio in the same sentence? You just don't. It doesn't mean that Craig Biggio wasn't a hell of a player, but you know what he wasn't? He wasn't Mickey Mantle or Babe Ruth or Pedro Martinez or, pick the ultimate superstar that you saw. Right? And somehow we've gotten the Hall of Good. That's the same thing with the NFL. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm watching the AFC, and in watching Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, you start to go, well, maybe this is their year. But then you think, wait, I thought it was the Bills' year. And then you go, and they still have the Chiefs. Like, you got 3 tremendous teams. But the rest, ew. Like, I'm a Charger fan. They're okay. They're going to make the playoffs. The Broncos, they're okay. They're going to make the playoffs. The Houston Texans are a playoff team. Has anybody seen them play over the last couple weeks? Oh, my gosh, they're terrible. So the playoffs, in many ways, are like the Hall of Fame, in that we've got the good and the great combined. And then when you have 2 non-playoff teams like Seahawks and Bears, you're like, wow, these teams are bad. I know. Why are they on a standalone game? It's like, well, because we had to put something on TV and we ran out of choices. Byron, you're a huge Seahawks fan. Going back to your childhood days in Wisconsin. But you'd have to, I know as a win, that was hard to watch.
Well, yeah, it was 6-3.
I know.
No, I'm not going to make any excuses.
But
I've said on this show.
There is a world there where 6-3, and not a huge, but 6-3, sometimes you can't go like, well, look, this is just great defense. Like, no, it's just really bad offense.
Yeah, the Seahawks played a game against the Cardinals, Legion of Boom era, where the Cardinals had the ball for like 42 minutes of the game and just dominated, and the defense just made stop after stop, and it was like a 6-6 tie in overtime. It ended. It was just crazy game. That was not what last night was. It was bad football. And I've said about the Seahawks, just for their case, is that they may make the playoffs, but they're not a playoff team. It's not what you would look at and say that's a team that should be in the postseason. I mean, they've got 9 wins, but can they beat somebody better than them? I don't know. But no, it was not good. And I think there are a lot of things that you can say the reason why. Bears obviously falling on their face. The Seahawks have holes. I think short week plays into it as well. And I think short week played on Christmas Day as well. It hurts them. So not only, Doug, is it we're being exposed to these games more and more.
Yeah.
And this is the most exposed week I think we've ever seen in NFL history.
Yes.
Because we have 5 days of games for Week 17. The late window on Sunday has just 2 games. It is Packers, Vikings, and Browns, Dolphins. That's it. So it is. It's and this is something that's been the secret for a while. But when you get exposed like this, when you have games like this, it's not necessarily good for the league. Even though you're thinking, more football.
Yeah, no, I mean, Saturday's game is Chargers, Patriots, right? And then you have Denver and Cincinnati, which is a pretty competitive game, although Cincinnati, terrible defense, right? And Denver's just okay. And then Arizona taking on the Rams, right? Isn't that the nightcap on Saturday?
Yeah, Denver's defense is really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just kind of run out of good games, right? Like, wow, I mean, when Houston falls apart injury-wise and isn't very good, I mean, pretty obvious the order of who got to pick. Pretty obvious. Like I would guess without knowing. I don't know. My guess is that Netflix got first pick, and then Fox got second pick, and then third pick is probably, I don't know, CBS?
Well, I don't even know if it went like that, Doug, just for the simple fact of you had to schedule the Steelers and Ravens and Chiefs and Texans the week prior. You had a Ravens-Steelers game that was on Fox. on Saturday. Like, how weird is that? Like that. And now I know the leagues or the conferences blend with the networks. It's not Fox is the NFC and CBS is the AFC. But yeah, I think that the NFL probably made sure that Netflix got the games that they needed and then started from that point and worked on their way down. Because Packers Vikings was also flexed to your point of Eagles Cowboys, and that's not the first primetime flex. They had to move the Bills Patriots to a primetime window last week at 4:25 Eastern because the games weren't good.
Yeah. I mean, I also think, and like this is where it's very relatable to my level of college basketball. You can death by schedule, just death by schedule. You just can't, it doesn't matter. I mean, football obviously even more so, but you just can't dial it up that often for some of these teams, especially ones that are a little bit depleted and then you get beaten up and you really have no chance. Before the game ever starts, you really kind of have no chance. No chance at all. And it's interesting, right? It's like, you almost feel like the NFL should take a week off before they get to this Christmas week, so they put their best foot forward. And now people keep lapping it up, and they're going to keep watching. But gosh, at what point do people go like, "Yeah, I'm good"? Because it's just not good football. Hard watch, especially for those of us who are gigantic football fans. Sponsored by Stand Up to All Hate. Call a timeout against hate.